Node.js because already Node.js is installed in our computers. We done that before. We were using Bootstrap and all. We installed everything. Now, what are the features of Node.js? What are the drawbacks of Node.js? These points we discuss. Today we will see how do we write the Node.js programs. How do we use the Node.js programs? How do we deal with the Node.js programs? Actually, um, technically, first basic point I will tell you. Generally, uh, general simple things not required for us. Uh, People talk about Node.js, REPL, and all this. We don't need them all because already we are good in JavaScript. We don't need to learn how Node.js uses JavaScript. JavaScript we already perfectly learned. So we will use that JavaScript here detailedly and we can work with them. Because many times when you look at Node.js related various examples and tutorials, many people will give you about commands and how to use the commands. We don't need to learn them. Why? Because already we know. We know JavaScript, we know OOP concepts in JavaScript, we know how to write functions, closures, we know how to manage all the iterations, loopings, conditions, everything. So if you are perfect in JavaScript, you can directly start working with server applications, right? So generally people who don't know all JavaScript basics, for them generally Node.js people will teach like REPL commands, means how to run the commands, how to write console output statements and all. This is nothing for a JavaScript person. If you are perfect in JavaScript, you don't need all this. Just you need to understand only one point. The basic Node.js Node.js program structure. You need to understand the Node.js program structure. How we write programs in Node.js. What is the basic approach actually? Remember, Node.js program structure, it comprises of three levels actually. First is I will tell you a typical Node.js program comprises of three major parts. So one is importing the required modules. First installing the required modules. Second, importing the required modules and implementing the functionality with properties and methods provided by modules. These are the three stages actually. We have to install required modules. Actually, installing modules is nothing but, generally already I told you, Node.js is modular. That means when you install Node.js, Node.js, it will provide you only the basic library, the basic core library of Node.js, which contains compilers and all. It will provide the basic core library of Node.js, so which provides the basic compilers and all. So every additional module that you want to use, that you can simply say that every additional library you want to use in Node.js. So you want to use in Node.js must must be installed. So you know how to install. So example, it will be like this. Example, it will be like, so npm install and library. You can simply say that package name. So that means library is a package. Package contains a set of libraries. For example, suppose I want to use some library. Then first I need to install that library. Node.js can use various libraries, but it will not get all the libraries by default. It will not get all the libraries by default. By default, Node.js will provide only few libraries. Others you have to install according to your requirement. So that is the basic one, right? Now, here, after installing the library, we have to import the library. So import the library. That means after installing the library, what we have to do is you have to create a JavaScript file, a Node.js program. We have to create a Node.js program, so which is a JavaScript file, .js file. Node.js programs will have the extension .js. Now in the file, so you have to import the required modules. Modules are nothing but you can call them as classes. So you have to import the required classes, modules. So by using require library, by using a require method, we have to import the required modules. So that means, so you have to define this in example like this. We have to use where some reference is equal to, we have to use the word require, and we have to define the module name. So first you have to install the package required for the module. After that, in your Node.js program, you have to import that module. After importing the module, you can implement the functionality. That means, so what you can do is, so you can use reference dot property, what property it is, reference dot method, what methods it is having. We can access them and use them. So typical Node.js program contains 3 stages. First, installing the required modules. Second, importing the required modules. And the third, implementing the functionality. These are the 3 stages actually, 3 stages. After that, we have to compile and run Node.js programs. That means we have to compile and run Node.js program by using Node compiler. So compiler. We have to compile and run the Node.js programs by using Node compiler. That means syntactically, so we need to keep in this way. So we need to compile. That means we have to use Node and program.js. That is the Node.js program. That is how we compile the Node.js programs. how we compile and run the Node.js programs. So first step is first step is you have to install the modules. Then you have to import the modules and you have to implement the functionality. Implement the functionality. So that is the basic structure of Node.js programs. So which I will show you now. And the language used by Node.js is JavaScript. So generally, I will show you here. Let's go to the project. If you are dealing with, let's open our location. If you are dealing with, full stack. General, if you are dealing with general functions, you don't need to import any library. If you are dealing with some extra functions, so we need to import the library. We need to import the library. So first, what you have to do now is in our project. So go to the project. Let's create a folder. We will create a folder. Server as the folder. Okay. All the server side coding we will keep in this server folder. Okay. Now in this, you create a new file. You create a new file. So some hello.js. Node.js programs will have the extension .js. And Node.js programs will use general JavaScript only. All JavaScript commands you can use. But remember, here we have to use JavaScript only language. That means you should not use document.write. That means you should not use any DOM manipulations. Node.js is using JavaScript server side. That means it is used as a language, means variables, data types, operators, statements, functions, classes, object-oriented features, all these. We should not use any window object. We should not use any history object. We should not use any document object, location object like that. We should not use any alerts. We should not use any prompts because it is not DOM manipulation. It is a server-side JavaScript. That is the reason when we discussed about JavaScript, I told you, JavaScript is not a client-side script. JavaScript is not a client-side script. JavaScript is a language which is used client-side, which is used server-side, which is used even in database, database also. Temporarily, suppose here I am writing the program. Here I am writing the program. So console.log. So, and we are writing hello Node.js, something output like this. We need to compile and run this. We need to compile and run this. All your variable declarations, everything same. So we should compile and run this. Currently, I don't need to install any library because console log is a basic command. It is available in the base library. We don't need to import special libraries. So because it is available with the core library, we don't need to import any special library. Another, now we need to compile and run the program. Compile and run the program. So you can do that. So you can do that from terminal. Terminal. What you do is open this file location in the terminal. Terminal means right click and say open in integrated terminal. When you select open in integrated terminal, you can see here the full stack server, that is the terminal open. In the terminal, you can simply run the command node hello.js. That is the node compiler, node compiler, and hit enter. Now you can see it shows the output hello Node.js. That is generally writing a program, compiling the program and executing. But this is not why we are here, right? We are here to use Node.js so with complete server side interactions. So then we need to learn how to create server, configure server, how the server will manage the request and response. But all the server side programs are written as JavaScript programs and they need to be compiled in this way. They need to be compiled in this way. So what we have to do is, so that means an example here. So sample Node.js program. So for that, we need to first step. So create first point here, create server folder on your in your project. Okay. So add a new JavaScript file, JavaScript file, JavaScript file into folder that is hello.js. Okay. Next step. So you have to write some program. So hello.js. So it will have the program like console.log and hello node.js. Some program is there, hello node.js. We have to just write that line there. Okay. And after that, we need to compile this. So that means open program location in terminal or command prompt. You can open in command prompt also. Then you have to run that. So here node hello.js. That is how we need to handle. This is a general thing. But this is not what we want in Node.js. We want Node.js to be handling all the interactions server side and working with server side. So now we are going to learn how Node.js so handles the web server, how it handles the web server and works with the web server. So let's see. That means Node.js. So we are going to deal with Node.js web server. Technically in HTML basics, already I told you what is a web server. You remembered the definition about web server. I already told you. Web server resembles both hardware and the software. Software. It satisfies. So it satisfies the client request by sending and receiving the data. So it satisfies the client request by sending and receiving the data. So technically, so a web server, I already told you this definition in the introduction of HTML itself. So web server uses HTTP. So protocol, HTTP as a protocol. HTTP. So it is a standardized system for transporting data over the internet, right? HTTP. It uses HTTP. So hypertext transfer protocol. So what is web server? How this web server works in the introduction of HTML itself, I told you. So, but here we are going to learn the detailed approach of creating the web server, configuring the web server and working with it, right? So technically, how the web server handles. So it handles the requests. So it manages the response. It handles the request and response. And the basic approach, already we discussed about that. So let me give you a detailed option about that. That means how the basic option works for that. That means how the web server works. Then how to create web server in Node.js, how it manages the request and response. That is what we need to learn here. So generally, how the web server works, what are the various interactions? So let's see the basic diagram for that. So the basic diagram, how the web server responds. Actually, so we have the client. So we have the client. Okay. So we have the client and we have the server. So this is the web server, client and the web server. Web server is also called as HTTP server. So we have the client and web server. So this is client. So this is the client and this is the server. So server. Generally, so server already we know. So it resembles both hardware and software. So it contains the interactions and all. Actually, first step, what happens? That means how this process works. I will tell you. So that means various stages will be there. Various stages will be there for this. So the first step, actually the first step, what happens here? Let's take a detailed note here. Yeah. First step, what happens is user enters a URL in their browser in their browser. So user enters a URL in their browser. That is the first step happens here. So when user enters a URL in their browser, so that means, so that is what actually client makes a request here. That means that is the request happens to the client. So that request happens to that client. That means user enters a URL in the browser. That's what actually happens on the client. Okay. Then what happens is, so a HTTP request is submitted to URLs to the corresponding server. That means this is making a request to the server. This is making a request to the server. That means client makes a request to the server. So client makes a request to the server. So that means a request to the server. Client makes a request to the server. So that is the request made to the server. Okay, let's keep this as a request. So this is a request. Okay. Clients makes a request to the server. Request to the server. That means actually when user enters the URL, what happens here is, so what happens is an HTTP request is submitted. HTTP request is submitted to URLs corresponding server. URLs corresponding server. It will submit to that related server. How that requests are made, I will show you. We are going to learn that practically. That means this is a request is submitted to the server. This request is submitted to the server. So the request is happening here. It is submitted to the server. So client makes a request and that request is submitted to the server. And generally, so server receives that request. Server is going to receive that request. It comprises of all the data logic. That means server is a machine. Already I told you, it resembles both hardware and software. Server resembles both hardware and software. So what server will do is, technically what is server and what it is going to manage. So actually now server, after receiving the request, what happens is, so server is a physical machine that operates the server logic. it operates the server logic on the user's request, on the user's request. So it will operate that on the user's request. So and determines the response to send, and determines the response to send according to request. According to the request, it will determine what response to be sent, what response to be sent. That means, so the client request comes from the URL. That request will be processed on the server. After processing the request, now it has to send the response. It has to send the response to the client. It has to send a response to the client. That means it has to manage some activity so that it can send a response. Actually, server does this. So technically, server is going to handle this. Server is going to handle this. That means usually server is a machine which contains all the logic. That's what we said, server side scripting. And who is managing this here? Actually, this is done in our Node.js. In our Node.js, we are doing this. Node.js is going to handle this process, is going to handle this process, and it sends a response. That means usually what happens now in the next stage. So what happens is, so a HTTP response is sent. So generally a HTTP response is sent. So an HTTP response is sent, response is sent to user, user is nothing but client. Response is sent to the client. So in the form of HTML, the request response is sent off in the form of HTML or file or JSON. The response can be in any form, or JSON, or it can be even in a plain text format also. Response in other formats. These are all the formats it can send. So for the request, the response is sent. For the request, the response is sent. And the response can be in various ways. That means it will send a response. Generally, how the response will be? A response can be a HTML response. It can be a file response. So it can be a JSON response. So it can be some plain text response. It can be an XML response, XML also. It can be various types of response. Depending on the situation, it can send different types of response. Now, user receives a response. So in the form of a HTML page. That means finally, so the last step, what happens here is usually users receives a response. That means client or user receives a response. Client receives a response. So in the form of HTML page, in the form of HTML page. So which renders content in browser, which renders the content in the browser. That is what finally happens on the client machine. That is what finally handled on the client machine. This is how the entire process actually happens. So in Node.js, we need to learn how to create this server that can manage the request from the client, that can process the request, and send a response to the request. And to manage all this is the basic architecture. So this is the basic architecture. I will copy that and I will paste here in our project. Yes. So this is the basic functionality of the server. the basic functionality of the server. That is how server is going to manage the activity. It is going to manage the activity. Now the key point is for that how it will manage this activity. For that what it needs actually. To handle this activity, Node.js uses a HTTP module, HTTP module to create a server, and configure the server functionality. To create a server in Node.js, we need a module HTTP. So this module is going to manage the request and response. We need to configure the module. So we need to create a server that can handle the request and send the response. Let's see how it can manage everything, how it can handle everything. So technically, so first what we need to do is, so how do we create the server? Let's see. Now here I am creating a new program. So this is JS. I am creating a new program, and the program is web server.js. Okay, web server.js. Now here we need first to import the module. The module required. First step, we have to import module required for application. We have to import module required for application. Currently, we need HTTP module. So how we import the module? So by using a require method, and we have to use the module which you want. I need a HTTP module, but this module is not there. We need a HTTP module. That HTTP module is not there. First, you have to install that module for your project. And you know that generally, whatever the modules you need, you have to install through NPM, Node Package Manager. And all the modules will be stored inside your Node modules folder. So open the terminal and here install. So in your project, you have to install npm install. So HTTP. We have to install HTTP module. So that means already I told you, by default, no module will be available. Only the core module will be available. That core module will not provide all the facilities to you. You have to first import the module. You have to install the module. So HTTP module, you have to install HTTP module. So we have two modules required. Actually, HTTP module and HTTP status. So you have to run HTTP status codes. So, and you have to install HTTP. You can use so npm install HTTP -s. S is used for saving that library permanently. Otherwise, what happens is in your project, it will reinstall it. So generally, it will reset whenever you are recreating the library. Whenever you install a new library, it will reinstall again. So we don't want that. So we need save. So save this. So npm install HTTP. We are installing a HTTP module. So it is ready. So HTTP module is installed. So it is installed. Now, generally, so the modules that you install, they are copied into this node modules folder. In that HTTP we are having. So we have a HTTP module. HTTP module. I will show another approach of creating Node.js projects separately. First, we will see in our existing project here. Now we have to create a reference where any variable name, suppose I given HTTP and is equal to require. We have to use require. Require which module? HTTP module. We have to import that here. First step, we have to import the HTTP module. So which is used for creating, the HTTP, which is used for creating the HTTP server. It is used for creating HTTP server. Generally, HTTP server uses HTTP status codes. HTTP status codes are nothing but they are error codes for different status. You remembered already in AJAX, I told you, HTTP status code 404, 300, 200, different status codes will be there. So we can get those status codes also, and we can install those status codes to send various status messages. So what I will do is, so here I will use another library, npm install. So http status codes, http status codes hyphen yes. We have to install these two libraries. So that means we are installing HTTP status codes and we are installing HTTP. These two packages are installed. Now you can import this HTTP status codes also. So where I will just give HTTP status. So status is equal to require, and it should require HTTP status codes. We have to import HTTP status codes. These are the two libraries we are importing. Now we need to create a web server. We need to create a server. Through HTTP, you can create a server that can manage the request and response. So to create a server, we have to use HTTP dot. We have create server method. Create server method. This create server method, so it uses a callback function. You can use your lambda expressions, arrow functions, or actually create server uses a callback function. It uses a callback function. This function can handle two objects. One is request object, another response object. Request object, already I told you, it is used for fetching information from the server. Response object is used to send response to the server. So generally, how we can configure the response, we will see that. So important, these are function parameters. So function parameters, not global. Already I told you that you are installing packages. So these are only for this project. So this is not a new point to you, na? Bootstrap, jQuery, whatever library you installed, jQuery UI and all these, they are installed. uh, They are present in which folder? They are present in which folder? I just showed you now in which folder they are present. And where is your node modules? Where is your node modules? Individual for every project. It's a general point. Already you are learning this in Bootstrap and all this. So it is, I just showed you now that it is in the node modules. Node modules is already, if you are our general regular learner of our sessions, you already know that whatever library you install, it is only for this project. It's not global, right? Uh, I hope you remember that forever, right? Yeah. Now, here we need to configure the response. So request, we need to define the response and request. How to handle the request, we will see later. Initially, we need to send the response. We need to configure and send the response. So initially we need to configure and send the response. We need to define the response and handle the response. Usually how to handle the response, how we can configure and handle the response. Technically, what happens now is we just use the response object. Currently, I'm using just response object. And through response object, I am sending a message. So any response message you can send. Later, I will tell you detail, right? Currently, I'm just showing you a simple approach. Later, we will design a detailed response. Currently, so we are just using response. And this response, so message we need to send. So, and we need to configure this response. So generally response uses a write method. Response uses a write method to send a response. What response you want to send? You can send a response to the client. So that means whatever the code you want to send, that means suppose, so welcome to Node.js. So this is the response we are sending. How to send HTML response and all these we will discuss about that. So we are sending that response, So we don't need even status codes also currently. Status codes also, I will tell you in the next program how to handle them. Currently, only server we will create first. So for that, HTTP is required enough. We created a server. That server is using a response. So welcome to Node.js. Now here, so many points are there. Okay. Now this server should start. This server is loaded into memory. Now how to access the server loaded into memory? For that, we need to create a reference where app is equal to that server which is loaded into memory. So server is created and it is having a response. And this server is now accessed by using app. So it is in the memory. From memory, how you can access it? You should keep in a reference name. I am keeping in a reference name. After defining that, so now server need to start. Server need to start. Then app dot, we use the function listen. That means the server starts listening to your request. It starts listening. So server listens. On which port number it should listen? You have to define the port number. Suppose I given port number some 8080. You can give any port number. So 300, 3000, 4000, 500, 600, 8080, any port numbers, you can give any number. So technically, so it starts listening on the port number. Then what is your server address? We will put a message, console.log, server started, server started, server started. And what is the address of your server? Generally, it will be http://127.0.0.1:8080. That is the port number. So it says server started on this particular port number. So what we have to do now? So that means we created a server. Server starts listening. So then we have to make a request. First, open the terminal and compile this program. So node web server.js, and it says server started. Now open your browser and make the request. Open your browser and make the request. So that means here, so we are writing http://127.0.0.1 port number is 8080 and hit enter. And it is making a request to that particular server. And that server has to respond with a response. Here, so many points are there. Generally, we are using the response message. Observe here in this. We are using response message, response.write. Generally, response.write is used if you are presenting on HTML. If you are presenting on HTML, it will use that response.write. So if you are not using HTML, then you have so many other options. First, I will tell you that. See, currently write. This is for sending an HTML response. Suppose if you want to send just a response, actually, so we have an option response end. So which ends the response by sending this. So it will console. It will send a response to this particular. Actually, when you are sending the response, we have to tell what kind of response you are sending. So generally, how you can define what kind of response you are sending? I told you HTML response, file response, JSON response. So what we do is here, we will create response related details. How to create response related details? So generally, what we do is we can use response dot. We have a function. So right head. Response right head indicates what response you are sending. It indicates what response you are sending. It is expecting status code. Status code is 200 if response is successful. So if request and response is successful, then it is 200. 200 is actually okay. Later, I will give you the list of those status codes. Already I given you in Ajax different status codes. Later, I will give you a detailed information about that. And it has to send the response type. So response type is defined by using a JSON object. So it defines content type. We have to use content type. That means here we have to define content type. What content type you want to send as response? So I want to send text HTML. That is the content type we need to send. So that is response, how it has to send the content type. Now we need to create one response message. So we have to create one response message. So we have to use a response message. I am creating a response message and I will put a HTML response here. Welcome to Node.js. So that is a heading. That is a HTML response message. This response message must be sent. It should be written into that HTML. That means we have to use response.write. So we have to use response.write. It should write this response message. It should send that response message. After sending the response message, that response ends. So that means we have to use response object. Response dot end. So the response ends. That is how generally we configure the response. So this is a very lengthy process. We need to handle all this step by step. We need to configure this. But this is how we need to define. Later we will learn so many techniques. That means response uses so a header, response header, which I will give you detail. We will discuss about that. Now remember the port numbers should not conflict with existing port number. That means already on that port number, something else may be running. You have to use different port number. Instead of 12701, you can use the word localhost. Directly, you can use the word localhost currently. So after creating this, you have to compile this. That means node webserver.js, webserver.js. It starts that. We need to request that here. So that means here we need to request. So http colon / 127.0.0.1 colon port number 8080. So it has to get that response and display that response. And you can see that response is coming in a HTML response. So we have to create a response. We need to tell what kind of response we want to send. And we need to create a response into that type HTML. And we need to add the message for the response, and we need to send the response. When client makes a request, that response will be sent. Now, this is where all your logic is written. That means connecting with the database, reading from the database, storing the data in table, sending the data as a response. All such things are managed here in this location. So create server, we are creating a server. We are configuring the server, and we are managing the request and response with the server. So this has several techniques, different methods are there. We will learn all the methods. First, you just try this method. That means in this example, what we have done, first we have to install. So HTTP module. To install HTTP module, we have to use, currently HTTP is enough. npm install. So http-s. So you can also install npm install http status codes -s. These two modules you have to install. After that, you need to add a new program. So program, that is webserver.js. And in this program, so we have to write webserver.js. In this program, we have to write this code. So I need to just write this code. I will give that code here. This is the code you have to write. So this is the code we need to write. So just code I will give here. This is the code we need to write. After writing the code, next step, so compile the code. So that means we have to use, so node webserver.js. And after that, we have to open browser and request. And you have to request http colon / 127.0.0.1 colon 8080. That's how we need to manage. Now, how to create request, how to create response, what are response headers, what type of response you can send, all these details we will see in our next session. Tomorrow we will discuss detailedly about this server-side programming. Okay, this is the basic example of how the server is created and configured. And tomorrow we will go in depth about this, and we will learn all the methods, how to manage the request and response. Okay, tomorrow we will create this, and we will see one more time.